not a church member. But I had a run-in with a local person. I was out on the property where the Bridges program is. The Bridges program is the local homeless shelter and pallet shelters. It's out north of town. Anyway, I was there, and this person started in on me and talking about the churches of Florence. And he was deeply concerned that the churches in Florence weren't doing anything about the shelter. And not in the way you're thinking right now. His comments were something to the effect of, there is so much money in Florence. There is so much money in Florence. If the churches would just get together, they could run this program and really do something good. Listening, okay. He continued on. He said, this should be a church project, not a government project. They shouldn't take any money from the government. He said, because God is the only one who's going to be able to help these people. They don't need counseling. They need to have the demons cast out. That's the only way to help. And if he had stopped there, we would have been okay. And then he continued. And the pastors in this town should be afraid because things are going to change really soon and they are going to be in trouble. They are going to be judged for not telling their flock the truth. Okay. He was deeply concerned and adamant that the preachers and the shepherds were going to be in trouble and that only a revival or a mass exorcism was going to help the homeless population and help you as church members to do the right thing. And then he even went on so far as to quote scripture, saying, it's out of James, about not many of you should become teachers because you'll be held to a higher standard. And I agree with that. And when I said, well, don't paint everybody with the same brush, he says, no, I have perfect right to judge. Like, okay, I think we're done. Now, before we write this person off as somebody on the fringe, a loose cannon, or however you would want to characterize that, I want to read the passage from Acts for today. It's from Acts chapter 19, starting with verse 23. Okay? Paul is in, oh my goodness, I've looked at this passage so many times. He's in Ephesus, and he is, anyway, he's in Ephesus. You'll pick up the thread here. About this time, no little disturbance broke out concerning the way, the Christians. A man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the artisans. These he gathered together with the workers of the same trade and said, you know that we get our wealth from this business. You also see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost the whole of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and drawn away a considerable number of people by saying that gods made with hands are not true gods. And there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis will be scorned, and she will be deprived of her majesty that brought all Asia and the world to worship her. When they heard this, they were enraged and shouted, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. The whole city was filled with confusion, and people rushed together to the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Artocras, Macedonians who were traveling with Paul. Paul wanted to go into the crowd, but the disciples would not let him. Even some officials of the province of Asia who were friendly to Paul sent him a message urging him not to venture into the theater. Meanwhile, some were shouting one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Some in the crowd gave instructions to Alexander, whom the Jews had pushed forward, and Alexander motioned for silence and tried to make a defense before the people. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours, all of them shouted in unison, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." But finally, the town clerk quieted the crowd, and he said, "Citizens of Ephesus, who is there that does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple keeper of the great Artemis and the statue that fell from heaven? Since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. You have brought these men here who are neither temple robbers nor blasphemers of our goddess. If therefore Demetrius and the artisans with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges there against one another. If there is anything further you want to know, it must be settled in the regular assembly, for we are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause that we can give to justify this commotion." When he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. This is the reading of the Lord for us today. Thanks be to God. Okay, a couple more stories. And anyway, they relate somehow, and I'll get to that in just a minute. In my grandmother's house, my grandmother's house, the front living room was a sacred place. It was a place where we as children were never allowed to go. And I'll tell you why. There was a baby grand piano there that had not been tuned in probably 30 years. And I know this because I snuck in there a few times. There was nice furniture. There were a few sturdy-looking knickknacks. And there was a pretty hefty layer of dust. Other than that, we couldn't figure out why we shouldn't go into this front room. But we were never, ever to go in there. And that was communicated to us every time we arrived at her house. Now, Grandma ultimately had dementia. And we knew she was in the later stages of dementia when Grandpa served us a meal in that front room. We knew that Grandma was really ailing, and that was our last visit before she died. Okay, another idea here. I was driving down the Beltline. You drive, you know the Beltline, and you know where it goes from 2 lanes into 1 after the stoplight as you're coming back to 126. I saw this big, high lifted truck and a little Honda cut in front of it where those places merged. They were side by side, and the Honda just hit the gas and cut in behind. And that guy, it was a guy, in that truck chased that Honda all the way to Veneta before giving up. One more. You guys are going to be so disappointed. No. Do you have friends that organize their whole fall season around football games? Oh. Are you married to one, Sharon? No, I'm not. Oh. I mean, there's massive planning. There's road trips. There's tents that have to be put up and taken down for the pregame parties. You know, anyway, and it could be the summer in baseball. I know that one of my friends took a 3-month sabbatical so that he could go and worship, pay homage, he could go to all the major baseball league stadiums, Major League Baseball stadiums. Okay. Now, the common thread through here, I hope you've picked out, and that common thread is passion. It's passion. Or if you want to use a religious word, you could say idolatry. And that may be a little strong. In Acts chapter 19, we witness the passion of the worshipers of Diana, the silversmiths and the worshipers. And what had happened that whipped them up into such a frenzy, or like the guy in the lifted truck? What is it that got them so upset that they would chant for 2 hours? Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. What could possibly trigger such a display of passion? Well, it was that their goddess was mercifully blasphemed, that their temple was, no, the temple wasn't desecrated, the goddess wasn't mercilessly blasphemed. Instead, it was a couple of guys that came through town talking about another god. As a result, a few people turned away from worshiping Diana and from buying silver statues of her, and their business was getting hurt, possibly. In return, the worshipers of Diana, Artemis, were filled with wrath. They were mad because they were so passionate about their goddess. The whole city was filled with great confusion. And Ephesus is a really large city. They rushed into the theater. They seized some of Paul's companions. Those Ephesians were committed to Diana and the worship of her. That's about the same as a pregame party or a trip to the ballpark or willingness to condemn all pastors or preachers or all churches in town. It's about the same as chasing someone for the unforgivable expense of being cut off. Those Ephesians quit their work for the day, assembled to chant the same stupid thing for 2 hours. And we are so passionate that after 45 or 50 minutes of church, you're checking your watch. Maybe I should. I have a certain amount of admiration for the man I talked to. I really do. It makes me think that maybe I do need to consider what I teach and preach. All teachers and preachers should be mindful and careful and consider what they preach. All of us should be mindful of what we say to each other, about others, what we write, what we post, even what we think. And that reminder can come from sources that we don't even agree with. It also makes me consider if we showed a little more passion about the one we worship, who knows what modern day worshipers of Diana may be persuaded to give up their silver idols and worship the living God instead. Who knows what other worshipers of Jesus Christ might find that they too have been given the gift of passion for the Lord. So I want to dump this on you and make it your problem and not just mine. But I would like you to think about the things that you are passionate about. What are you passionate about? And why are you passionate about those things? Are you more passionate about those things than you are about your relationship with Jesus? Meditate on the amount of passion you have for Jesus Christ. And understand that passion is not equivalent to energy or being or acting as an extrovert. Passion is about what burns in your soul, inside. What is important to you. And then I want you to meditate on what Christian practices do you have or could you develop in your life that would foster genuine passion for Jesus Christ. And I'm going to tell you, I think it will probably involve other Christians. And so, resolve to practice one thing today and tomorrow that might lead you to be more passionate. Consider singing hymns while you're driving in your car or standing in the shower. Talk to your Christian friends. Read the Bible or other Christian literature. Pray for yourself, for your family, for the church. Reflect on God's grace in your life. Pick someone out in your circle of friends that is more passionate about Christ than you are. And observe how they live. I won't ask you to chant, Jesus is Lord, for 2 hours, because that would be silly. But it might reinforce in us. It might reinforce in all of us whose we are and who we worship. Let us pray.